Okay.
Cool. So, hey, Haiyang, thanks for being on this podcast. This is my first conversation where I'm going to be talking to somebody from the AI ecosystem. I came across your LinkedIn post recently and was very intrigued about your journey and also to learn more about what you're building with LionAGI. Um, the kind of folks who are going to be listening to this podcast are, at least for now, a lot of students from colleges in India, across the world, who are students of engineering, computer science, electronics, who are intrigued about AI and what's happening in this space. And through this channel, I'm trying to reach out to them and demystify some of these technologies, share my experiences, and things like that. And when I came across your post on LinkedIn, I reached out, and I'm so glad that you accepted to have this conversation. So thank you so much, and welcome to my channel.
Well, thank you so much, Harsh, for inviting me. So
Great.
I guess I'll do a tiny bit introduction of myself.
Please.
So my name is Haiyang Li. You can call me Ocean. I actually just finished my master this year. I had quite a few years. I had two ventures before my master, so it's a little bit interesting. I really got into the AI world because over the summer I was trying to write a 20-chapter book with one click. And then so that project auto writer eventually just turned into LionAGI. So it was very interesting.
Great. And could you share more about what was the need to write a book with one click?
There isn't really a need. It's more just fun.
Right.
More just want to show professor that her not very good, well, I'll rephrase, not very well structured HTML based slides into a long book. I was just trying to show off that. But that didn't finish, but LionAGI got more furnished, which was very interesting. And then, so about the end of September, I published an article.
Just
Sorry?
1 second, Haiyang. I'm being asked to check in the room. Just 1 second.
Oh, yeah. Hello.
Hey.
Where were you?
No, I was actually, I'm in a conference room, so I had to let them know that I have the space. This is as authentic as a podcast can get, I guess.
That's so.
Right.
Where
Please
were we
continue.
again?
You were talking about writing the HTML slides into one long book, and you wanted to showcase that possibility.
Oh yes, because it's a very challenging project. It was a lecture on computational finance. So it starts with Python, and then it gets into quite deep in mathematics as well. So there are quite a few challenges with that. There is one, the first and foremost codes. Second, paragraphs to describe the codes, and then third will be LaTeX in mathematical formula. And then I guess it will be from the LaTeX, and then you actually translate that into real codes that can be deployed. So the whole process was very interesting, and I definitely developed quite a deep understanding of how the agent system work through that time. So it was very fun. I mentioned that at the end of September. So how this thing got started was I published an article for Llama Index on knowledge graph construction. So it is more using Wikipedia as a entity filtration. So in a knowledge graph, there is nodes, which nodes are entities, and then relationship between. And then, so I used Wikidata to filter the entity and then to combine the same entity together so that a knowledge graph that come out looks better and more useful. So Jerry Liu, the CEO of Llama Index, reposted for me. And then I got somebody, currently my co-founder, found me. And then was very interested. So we got this just started like that.
Wow. So this work that you did to sort of produce that long artifact, that book, was using Llama Index and LangChain, or you were still trying to build your own framework back then?
Oh, it was 100% just my own code. I used OpenAI package a little bit to begin with, and then I removed OpenAI as well.
And replaced it with another open source LLM, or?
Just request.
Oh, I see.
Oh
So
no,
you,
I mean, I still use OpenAI like a API service, but instead of using their own Python
oh,
interface,
got it.
I just use request.
Just using request library. Okay, got it. There's a couple of folks in my circle of friends who've been using OpenAI, and a lot of times I've heard them say something very similar, that they just roll their own framework. Well, they don't call it a framework; they just roll their own code. And in the beginning, when we were sort of dealing with API calls, we were using GPT index, which became Llama index, right? And this is like less than a year ago. And at that point in time, I think a lot of my friends were saying, GPT index is great, but I'll just write my own stuff. Do you feel like today, with the maturity of LangChain and Llama index, most use cases could do with using those frameworks? Or I know it's probably use case dependent, but what is your understanding of the maturity of these frameworks? They keep changing, they keep evolving, but do you feel like they're mature, that people can build solutions on top of it?
So to answer that question fully, we really need to go deep down into look at the core of the technology behind, which is actually remarkably simple. It's just make a bunch of API calls, and then to make it even simpler, you send in string, you receive back string. It's just a bunch of parser. And then, so from that perspective, it really just comes down to you need to have a system that can articulate the complex structures of those instructions that you like the model to run. One is the sequencing. And then the second part is really logging the data so that you can have it for evaluation later on. And then I think the problem is interesting. I start with saying the problem with LangChain. I actually tried to learn LangChain. I gave up on my package after I realized LangChain has already developed a lot of things I was interested in. And then I tried learning it, and then I gave up on LangChain and went back to my own package.
Right. I can imagine doing that. I think a lot of folks getting into writing sort of middleware are trying to do something really quickly. Like, for example, I was playing with text to SQL kinds of use cases, and I was so impatient these last few weeks that I just said, I don't want to learn a framework, and I'm sure it does a good job, right? But let me just try this on my own. Let me just use requests, and just hook it up myself. And I can imagine not going back to a framework, like just continuing to build on the code that I've already developed. But I also wonder, what am I going to miss out? Because a lot of the community is rallying behind Llama Index and LangChain, and they're going to build a lot of bells and whistles, right? Like, for example, Swagger docs, good documentation, things like guardrails, and so on and so forth, which for me to build, in addition to just the core functionality of text to SQL, can become a tall order. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you sort of embrace the ecosystem of various features that become necessary eventually?
How I look at the current agentic system like LangChain is that they are very powerful. They are in a one-stop shop with the tool set that you sort of ever need. However, it's so much stuff, and then it gets very, very complicated way too quickly. And I do think the design logic of LangChain is a little bit unnecessarily too exposed, in the sense that you need to import 20 names to achieve one task, which in my opinion, a lot of use cases, you don't really need to dig up those names, because there isn't any customization needed anyway.
Right.
Like if every part require customization, then it makes sense to import a name. But if you import 20 names to do a standard procedure, that is way too hard of a learning curve. And then, so a big part of LionAGI design, I mean, it was for my own usage to just do a one-click write a book. So I designed it to be like just as intuitive as possible. And then going back to the API call, it's all just prompts. You send over the string. You still just want to keep those prompts very nicely. And that is a big part of how I think. You use techniques like RAG to help, but you're still just injecting some piece into the prompt.
That's a good framework to like build something simple. I think I can sort of imagine back to the days when we had a lot of these Python frameworks, right? Um, back in the day, there was WSGI, we had Django, Flask. I've also seen Bottle.py. And all of these frameworks became very popular when I think Python became popular and people wanted to build apps to showcase their model or data and things like that. And also just for a lot of Python developers who were doing analytics and data science to be, easily to be able to easily build a web app was, I think, very empowering. And there was this whole community of people who were adopting Flask, which was like the micro framework, and there were folks who were using Django for more like end-to-end web development projects. And I don't know if that is something that we'll see in the framework landscape for AI, right? We already have two very big contenders. There's a third one, I think, semantic kernel from Microsoft. Haven't heard a lot of chatter about it. And if you go to Discord, right, if you go to some of these channels on Discord, you might see frameworks being written by people such as yourself. So what is the difference that I would have to understand between LionAGI and, let's say, a LangChain? Are they even comparable, or they're completely in two different categories?
They are, in one perspective, certainly comparable. So if you look at the LangChain expression language, LionAGI can basically covers all the features of the LangChain expression language with a much simpler logic. Another aspect of LionAGI is, about one thing about LangChain is, because such a one-stop shop, it actually has a big hub for various document loaders, chunkers, and then toolsets, that sort of things. We are not digging into document processing that quickly yet. We will probably use just Llama Index for RAG for now, because our core competitiveness really come from a sophisticated structuring of instruction in a very simple way. I would say I really actually quite enjoy LangChain's like coverage. It is really very wide of a net that they put out. But then there is a issue with that. It is not really very simple to really run workflow of LangChain over a large set of data.
Okay.
I mean it in the sense that it's difficult to develop prompts and things for it. The prompt template of LangChain is not a concept I enjoy.
But just to understand this better, like a prompt template can be changed to your specific requirements, right? Are you saying that the default prompt templates that comes with LangChain are not enough?
No. I just don't enjoy this template system. I don't think it's needed to even have abstraction. You can have a much more traditional, in my opinion, SQL-based way to manage that.
Got it. Okay. All right. So let's dig into this a bit more, right? So, a few weeks ago, or maybe a few months ago, I wanted to learn as much as I could about LLMs and prompting and things like that, right? And I said to myself, we have RAG, and we have these workflows. Can I download from archive 100, 200 research papers related to large language models, NLP, prompting, and so on? And I basically went about doing searches on archive, looking at what people are talking about on Twitter, saying, hey, this is a great paper, read this, and so on. And I downloaded these 20 PDFs. Okay. I ran it through Llama Index, chunked it, indexed it, vector index, and then connected to GPT 3.5, GPT 4, and was able to ask questions.
Yeah.
And I think the answers were okay.
Mhm.
I would have, looking back now and having learned more about RAG in the past few months since then, I may have done things like every PDF could have been summarized before indexing, for example. I would have not indexed the references section, perhaps, right? Or a lot of the appendix where there's a lot of information that's not, I mean, it's a biased opinion, but that may not be part of the core paper, right? I was looking at really your thesis, your experimental setups, your conclusions, and pretty much stay within that. So I think it was great experience going from 0 to 1. Having a chatbot on those 20 PDFs itself was a great, experience. But I'm trying to understand what you're saying. Maybe it can be done better with a different kind of approach. And if I tried LionAGI, I would have a different experience.
Oh, yes. So regarding on the QA engine, the query engine, I think Llama Index has a quite an elegant solution. It was more on the template of the LangChain part that because in LionAGI, a prompt can just be a dictionary or any string. So it's remarkably, and then I designed the prompts to be separated as instruction and context. So take a very simple example. Going back to the research one, I published a tutorial on that you download a bunch of paper from our archives, the ARXIV, that website.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you download that, you put into an index, and then you put that query engine as a tool into the function calling for using LionAGI. And then you can have a automatic query, so automatic react system. So how I call it is auto follow up. You instruct the language model to reason what you need to ask from the task. So in the tutorial, the task is solve a GitHub issue for me, and then customize it to my own code base. Well, that was the second example. And then using in the second example of, so there are literally only 3 instructions, but I was able to run about 20, 30 messages out just from a lot of auto iterating with the tool sets. The tool set can be a query engine, it can be code interpreter, it can be any tool sets that you can think of. And then I designed a way that you can just loop around and around to do some kind of react. It's like reasoning, and then, oh, I need to ask about XYZ before I actually proceed to my real task. So I'll ask the query engine XYZ. Also allow parallel calling. So you can, so let's say you're writing the code and then you say, what is this object about? How is it written? Which function does it have? And all of those questions are parallelly asked, and then you receive all of them back, and then you have a much, much better customized instruction to let code interpreter or any other environment to write and run the code for you so that it returns a runnable Python codes. And then it can be adapted quite easily in further. You just need to put in another rack to make it start integrating with your code system. And then with a customized sandbox code running environment, you can let it automatically run the integration tests. So I'm really excited in that front. We will see a lot of automatic developments from various like just coding perspective, research perspective. There are a lot of things can be automated in a very intuitive way. And all we need to work out is actually how human approach those problems and trying to imitate the steps and process. And that's just how I see the first step is going to be like towards AGI.
Wow, that's interesting. No, I think I clearly see that there's a new paradigm required to really understand what it means to have, let's say, a AI co-pilot as a data analyst or an AI co-pilot as a research intern. And some of the current principles of RAG has to be a bit more agentic in manner, like you said, where there's a little bit of an iterative loop to clarify and iterate through different instruction sets. Because what I'm hearing and what I'm trying to understand is even a clear instruction set to a code interpreter is very different than just asking for the particular task to be done. And I think that clarification process an agent can perform by going back and forth on the initial instruction. Where do you think this will get used? Most likely, do you feel like it goes into building like coding assistants or data analysts or all of it?
I am extremely biased. I'm doing this, so my prediction is next year, in a few months, we will hopefully all be auto-developing. And but apparently, I'm not sure. The average adoption of AI is not as fast and as I wish it to be. But I guess that still leaves some strategic opportunity left for people. It's still a rapidly growing market. I see the future of enterprises to be really including just a few people, but with a lot of agents to work for you to automate workflows. And then for simpler codes like prototype drafts, this is definitely a great way of doing it. You can have somebody more experienced and seasoned can do probably the job of 20 people before.
Got it. And today, with that experienced individual with a lot of agents can really 10x and maybe who knows what the ceiling is, right? In terms of, I think, bringing automated agents and these kinds of agents into the mix, I do understand that writing code is one very obvious example, right? But there's also other aspects of a end-to-end software development project. Coding is one aspect, but there's design roadmaps, what to build, how to test, right? Also the user experience. Do you feel like all of those are ripe for the agentic model?
I do think so, but the agentic model really depends. It doesn't have to be fully autonomous. I like my approach for LionAGI is really a more structured agents way. So the instruction sets are over there to provide a overall guidance and then decide the steps of the workflow. But inside of each step, the agents have a little bit more autonomy to decide when using the tools. But still, at every single step, our input output are structured. In maybe not necessarily like a structured JSON format, but the interface between different steps is a solid one, so that the output are a lot more deterministic, and the steps that you wish the agent to take to achieve the task are preset by you. This has an advantage over both chain of thoughts as well as the fully autonomous agents. And currently in the tutorial I pushed out, so I had 3 instructions in a linear format. And then the next step I'm trying to do is really trying to develop some kind of graph-based structure for the instruction set. So to give it even further flexibility.
Understood. I'm going to actually switch back to a metaphor that, or not a metaphor really. I think, many years ago we had this whole robotic process automation, RPA, where a lot of enterprises adopted automation workflows. But I think the difference has been Now, while you have to provide the workflow dependencies in what you just described, a lot of the work actually gets done by the LLM. At least the intelligence of instead of saying, "Hey, go and scrape or go and run this macro in Excel." Today, the agent can write the macro and execute it on Excel, right? That has been a big shift with AI and LLMs, right? Uh, but you still have to build the workflow, right? You still have to know exactly what the elements have to be from start to finish for that task to get solved. Do you feel like at some point, even that workflow development can be done by AI?
Definitely, definitely. Um, so one way really powerful of AI is its ability to write new things and then use that, and to write more new things and use the new thing to leverage its ability to create more new things. So like one way really to achieve what you've said is we can use LionAGI session object, and we can do nested session, which means you can have a workflow predefined and then you integrate that as to a large workflow. And then you can just have this keep on going up, stacking on top of each other. And then you can have some kind of, for example, one with the workflow can be to design such a workflow process. And then another workflow will be to take the design of a workflow process to actually make it into a real workflow and run it. And then another flow can be to test it. Another flow, it's just really, I think the constraint is our imagination.
That's a fair point. I think, and like you said, you could actually develop the workflow with AI and then implement that workflow with AI. I do feel like, and this is idle speculation, but there can possibly be a marketplace of workflows that are better than other workflows, right? For example, if I had to do an image editing workflow from start to finish, there could be folks who've thought through it so well as graphic designers that potentially an AI may not get to that level of finesse or that level of sophistication. So while we could ask an AI to develop a workflow for a particular task, having that workflow adopted from somebody who's done, let's say, graphic design for many years and is an expert might give you an edge uh, over an AI design workflow. Do you think that's even something to consider?
I would totally agree. So for now, the generic foundation models, even if you fine tune it, they are still pretty generic. So if you want to specialize into a very niche domain, you will be much better off to do the tool in conjunction with the domain experts. At the end of the day, you get much more specialized data, and then you get much better feedback to evaluate the model output. In specific applied domain, I think right now you definitely need experts to evaluate it. Otherwise, so for our example, using an agentic framework, we're really just going after intelligence here. So one potential use case that we are looking into is finance industry. So let's say we are going after Security Exchange Commission's documents, and then we actually might need chartered financial analysts to help us to really understand whether or not the workflow design that we made is good enough. And then I think this is an iterative process. And then once you're able to quite figure out how to work on the workflow on one domain, and then you can collaborate with other domains experts to really trying to automate this process as well. I do think automation is we're at a stage where automation can kick off really at a unprecedented speed.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you have a great point about automation and especially domain specific knowledge, right? Sometimes I wonder in domains that are where there's a data scarcity. For example, we have domains that have a lot of data, like medical, legal, right? There's a lot of data available. There's legal documents, medical documents, and you've seen large language models coming out of Google, like MedPalm, and folks are also fine tuning on legal data sets and so on. But there could be domains where there isn't enough published data, but there's a lot of experts. Maybe graphic design comes to mind, but I could be wrong. Let's assume that there's a domain where there's a lot of like human experts, but not a lot of published content for a fine-tuning process to be done. In such situations, what are some solutions that the industry can think about? Like, is it synthetic data? Is it generating fine-tuning, supervised fine-tuning data? Are those what we have to consider?
I'll say those are definitely some approaches. Synthetic data, and then you use that to fine-tune models is a pretty popular approach, even though how to evaluate that is very muddy right now. Our approach of solving the intelligence part of the problem is really to break it down into the smaller pieces. So we think it's a lot more important to have quality of data rather than the quantity of data. So if we can have all of those, let's say domain XYZ, you have all of those human experts to help you develop that workflow and then to really curate a data set. I would think it's probably better off to train a tiny language model on that tiny domain to do one thing. And then you have a mixture of experts. And I think that's a pretty elegant solution to this problem. And it's also more environmental in the sense that you use less parameters per call.
Right.
I think that is a solution that we're going after, and we're very interested in seeing how knowledge graph can be applied in that sense.
Got it. There's one question I had around, LLMs, right? So of course, LionAGI works with OpenAI. So your GPT 3.5, GPT 4, tomorrow Gemini, some of the proprietary models, right? And of course, there's a lot of interest in using open source models with Mixtral and Llama 2.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say I use LionAGI and I plug in Gemini. I run through a process, and then I plug in GPT-4. And I'm happy with one of them. I don't want to say which. Let's say GPT-4. I'm more satisfied with the GPT-4 output, right? Nothing against Gemini. I haven't used it a lot, but GPT-4 I have familiarity with. But when I come back to LionAGI, I come back to Haiyang and say, Haiyang, like, look, I'm not getting the kind of response I want from Gemini, but GPT-4 is doing well. Maybe Gemini is cheaper. What's going on? I don't want to be locked into like using GPT-4. Would you be able to say one way or the other which LLM to use? Would you be able to recommend an LLM, or that's something you don't want to be
I would give you a methodology on how to choose it yourself.
Okay.
So with LionAGI, you can log every single API call. That is, currently we're just doing API right now. We're not doing local yet. So basically, for every large language call, you have the input out to a log. So go evaluate it yourself afterwards. Okay. I would say it's probably better off just from a pure product perspective, from cost benefit analysis. Use small model as much as possible. But yes, you have something like a very robust, intelligent in the middle, like to orchestrate the small workflows. I think that will be an excellent approach. And then maybe because GPT-4 is currently the most powerful model still, you would want something like that as your centralized intelligence provider.
Understood.
It really depends on your use case.
No, fair enough. I think as a practitioner, those are some of the questions I would have, right, while using a framework like LionAGI. And that sort of brings me back to your journey, right? I think do you feel like you were sort of angling towards being in this situation, or this just happened and you just find yourself excited about being in AI? Or maybe back in your previous ventures, you always felt the need for something as powerful as AI, and then suddenly now here you are playing an important role?
So a tiny bit more story about my background. My first two ventures were actually in real economy and then has limited things to do with technology. So I enjoyed, so it was, one is the restaurant, one is the international e-commerce. So during I was doing the international e-commerce, I got very interested in financial markets. So I went to my master to do a quantitative finance master in New York City. So in my last semester of master, I went to worked for a value investing boutique hedge fund, and then that triggered a lot of things for me. So first of all, I got to see what kind of work that hedge fund really does, and then it really gave me a lot of ideas of how to extract the data you need from an unstructured way into structure, and then that provides a tons more insights into only the structured data that you existingly already have. So from then on, first of all, I was still trying to look for a job or trying to provide a consultancy in finance industry, and then my interest is just way too broad, and then I chase my ideas. So this LionAGI just come about. I mean, the auto writer just came about, and then it becomes the LionAGI.
Great. No, that's fascinating, because when you said when you talked about the unstructured data extraction, I think a lot of us who have worked in the industry on NLP tasks, right, remember doing, like, let's say, sentiment analysis, named entity recognition, classification, and using separate models for it, right? And for us, I don't think, well, I don't want to speak for others, but I never realized that there could be one model that could do all of these things. It just didn't seem like a possibility. I think, had I maybe thought about it, I would have gone down that path sooner. But looking at what LLMs can do today, pretty much multitask models, right? And that's a big shift. I think it's also very interesting to see that a lot of these tasks uh, can be done with one model. Plus, you can do so much more. Like the whole idea of function calling, tools use, seems like the LLM use cases are just beginning to expand, right? If you had to look forward, maybe a year or two, and I think a year is a short period of time in the AI world these days. Maybe you got well, not short, it's like a very long period of time. A lot happens in a year. If you had to look, maybe till next April or May, what are some things that you feel LLMs will be able to do better, right? I think function calling is a bit of a great, challenging area still for open source models. Do you think that'll get fixed so that most of us don't have to use OpenAI and can use Llama 2 and do function calling reliably?
I would say that definitely will be the case. To control the model output is of active interest of the industry. One of the biggest problem of open source is they don't really have things like JSON mode yet, and that is so important. But one workaround with that is just to have an OpenAI to validate the result, and then you technically still use the open source model to run all of your internal instruction customization, and then you use a OpenAI to validate the output. Because at the end of the day, what function calling really is just the model pick a function for you and provide the parameter. You still invoke the function in your own environment.
Right.
And then, so if it's just instruction, we just need it to be nicely formatted so we can parse the function to really map it to the actual implementation. So it's more about just the model output part, which I think is very, very important, and I think people are very interested in it.
I think that's a good point. I feel like With the function calling approach, where models are expected to take in a JSON and then parse that to understand or to sort of emit the right function with the right parameters, maybe there needs to be an approach where the JSON isn't important. Like that's, I think that gives you structure. I agree. But maybe there has to be a bit more research on the fact that maybe you don't provide it as JSON, maybe doc strings, Python doc strings, or even like markdown, like tabular format of function name, description, and parameters could do. Do you think that? I mean, I think that would make a difference. But what are your thoughts on that?
Going back to function calling on the formatting, I say JSON just because it's easy to parse. But anything that's easy to parse, you technically can do a format of that.
Fair enough. Yeah, makes sense. And I think with function calling, tool use, there are synonymous approaches. Uh, a lot of this looks like a language model being used not for like your conversational use case or generative text generative use case, but very much for being a component in a system where it can sort of help you hand off from one task to another, right? Uh, what happens when these function calling use cases hallucinate, right? Maybe the parameter is a numeric parameter and sort of is off by some percentage, right? Do you feel like this goes back to doing a lot more testing like we've traditionally done in software industry, right? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think to use RAG is a great idea in this use case. And then set up a lot of things. So yesterday I attended a workshop by Google and Llama Index. Google came up with a new model. I forgot the name, but it basically checks whether or not the question can be answered from the context provided. If it feels like I'm not confident enough, it gives you a number. It just says that I cannot answer the question from the context, but we'll still try to give you something. So I think that is really a great way, because hallucination a lot of times come out from I am talking about ABC, but suddenly it just start to give me 1, 2, 3, even though I didn't even ask for it, but just because. So have that kind of tool level validation is very important. Like you still, like you said, in being the component of a larger system, and then the larger system itself can actually be a conversational way, maybe not between user, maybe just between agents.
That's a good
and
point.
that conversation itself can be a component.
Yeah, I think if you stack it up, I think it becomes sort of like fractal in a way, where you have AI within AI and so on. I think that's I would love to see a complex system where there are multiple components, and one, like those Russian dolls, right? There's one doll and there's another one.
I
It's like,
was gonna say that.
right.
I have a very simple example on my GitHub on using nested sessions. So basically, you call one session to be prompter, and then use the other session as the main coding as the main coder, and then use the prompter to improve your prompt so that the code interpreter can do a better job. So that is just a very simple way of using an agent as a tool. And then you can give that coder session into a more senior coding session, So the possibility is really endless.
It is, right. But I think there's one thing that I always sort of wonder, right? Maybe I haven't looked. There's always that. So my knowledge is limited to what I'm exposed to and what I go and seek out actively. But at this point, the limit case for AI is, for a lot of us, is, hey, stock market. We'll go there and we'll build an AI that will just make us money while we sleep, right? That's great. And maybe somebody's already doing that. One wouldn't know if somebody's doing it. Why would they go and tell everyone that they're succeeding at it and so on, right? So we'll not talk about that, right? I'd love to, but we won't talk about that. But one thing that I would like to do, right, is gain knowledge about areas that I'm not skillful in or have no experience. For example, right? So one example that is sort of uh, adjacent to my skill set. I want to learn a new programming language. Right? I've always wanted to learn Rust. If I want to learn Rust today, how would I use the current, AI landscape with agents and RAG to help me learn Rust so that I become productive at it? I'm not going to start building something production ready, but instead of reading a book or just chatting with ChatGPT, I get a better experience where it tells me what to do every day and so on. Do you think that those are use cases we'll see? And what are your thoughts about building something like that?
That is
Or
a very
conceptually?
that is definitely very cool. We can develop workflows that are so specific into one thing. Well, some of the tools needed in that workflow definitely will be RAG. It can be some kind of vector index to query against some books on Rust. It can
Right,
be some kind of index to query against GitHub, let's say, or Stack
right.
Overflow. So that would be cool. Uh, I would say you still need a kind of a project in mind. You still like you still need a project.
True, true. Something to like build, right, as a task. Well, I mean, I've always wanted to build like simple web service in Rust where you could just chat with an LLM, right?
Yeah,
That's running on your laptop, right? So I think that's useful because we see a lot of these projects like Llama CPP, and if you have a small model, what can I learn? How do I learn enough of Rust that I can just run a small model on my Mac, right? Just that much. Because I tried learning Rust, but it was easy to sort of chat with ChatGPT and sort of get going. But the moment I had to think about crates and compiling it and sort of pointers and things like that, I started like getting into let me read this book, go let me read that particular concept and come back. Whereas I would want to just go back to the system and say, what, I don't know pointers. Could you explain that to me in a simple way? And I
mm,
know Python, so just help me out with telling me something that resonates with me as a Python programmer, and then I could sort of get the Rust idea, right? Um, I don't know if that's agentic or it's just a powerful language model could do it better. That's where I'm sort of confused, and I don't see a like with all of this software out there, right? I don't see how to put this together for myself.
so one thing I like to point out is I actually don't really use the phrase agentic framework that much. I just see it as we sending different prompts to the model and then receive different outputs.
Okay.
So that aside, yes, we give a model a persona and then just let it following our thing. So one thing you can do is to query against the textbooks, query and then query against your own code base, query against your own notes to see what kind of developers you are. And then that is definitely one interesting way to. So if you think about it, give me an example on how to do XYZ that I have done before, and then but implement it in Rust, and then you would have the workflow to find your stuff, check against the various sources, run the codes, and then make sure it runs, and then come back with explanation and your original Python codes, and then explain to you how that gets from Python to Rust. Like all of this are currently doable. But this whole process of coming out with this workflow is hard.
Yeah, it is hard. It actually does seem hard. I think maybe getting into it probably makes it easier. I haven't tried, honestly, but just the landscape of options is overwhelming sometimes, right? I think eventually there could be a framework which sort of becomes very specialized to learning, right? So like sort of LionAGI is being like a meta framework for agents and development of agents or usage of agents. But then somebody builds on top of that and says, if you want to learn something, this is the agent, this is the library for you, right? Just go and ask a question and then, you know, connect your Notion database or Notion account for your notes, your GitHub, tell us your GitHub ID, and so on and so forth, right? And to the extent where I could even learn how to write code in Python like somebody else, like the guys who wrote request library, right? Um, when request came out, it was such a great library because everyone said how great the code base was. It was so well written, good comments, and so on, right? And being able to learn how to write better, like just not even a programming language. Today, even writing a better design doc. In a lot of large companies, I think writing well is a skill that's very valuable. So how does one really take control with AI? Like we live in a world where we have GPT-4, right? And I think a lot of us don't seem to make the most of it. At least from the people I've spoken to in academia, in college, in school, even in even professionals. GPT-4 is still a very. Are they using it for an API, like for their project, or they're using like the chat interface to just have conversations? But a real co-pilot that could help them, go from literally one skill level to another. I think that would be a game changer, right?
I definitely agree on how large language model have already transformed how people accumulate skills. That is something quite astonishing that I didn't expect it. For example, I accomplished so many more things this year just than before, just because of large language model. So for example, for all of this automated system, I mean, yeah, I pushed a package for it, but I also use it myself.
Could you give me an example? I'm very intrigued. Like, what did you do with LionAGI?
So currently, the next step is to do some kind of auto development of LionAGI using LionAGI.
Wow, that's like a recursive sort of meta recursion. I don't know what to call it, but it's so cool to hear that. Great. Any examples of your community or users having used it for a specific task that you would love to share with folks?
I would really, really love to, but currently there's only my tutorial and examples. I'm trying to get the auto developer into a Forstack with a
Nice.
web interface as a Forstack example on how people can use LionAGI to create a reliable app like remarkably quickly. So it would be you input a GitHub link, and then or just tell it which branch you're looking for, and then copy and paste the issue from GitHub to there, and then we'll be able to give you a customized runnable Python codes, probably even using your own source codes functions.
Wow, that would be great for, I think, feature development, bug fixes, hot fixes. I think that would be amazing. I look forward to that.
Yeah. I'm very excited about that for Stack, and then we're also actively developing other things. So
Okay.
another thing to use is having a more complex logic of using the instruction set that we're very interested in. So basically, right now, LionAGI can do chain of thoughts and loop back chain of thoughts very easily. But we're also looking into getting tree of thoughts and graph of thoughts. So that'll be something very interesting to look into and see how different thought patterns, I mean, just instruction patterns, can alter the behavior and output that we're very interested in.
That's insane. I think that's very interesting that there's so many ways you could sort of influence behavior of an LLM, and I think some of the funny ones. I don't know if they really work. I haven't tried them myself, but I've seen chatter on X and other places that if you tell a large language model that the user will tip the model, let's say tip you $100, $5, whatever, there's a difference in output, right? So maybe a tip jar, approach in LionAGI would be interesting. What do you think of these things, right? When the model responds differently when you say I'll tip you or things like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, large language model are trained on human data, so I am not too surprised. I'm very it's very interesting, but not too surprised that large language model exhibit some of people's tendency. There was also a study on that. If you tell the model that it is May, it performs better than you tell it if it's December, because December is a holiday season. But you tell it in May, it performs statistically better. It's
Wow.
very weird.
It
Also,
is.
tell the model to think step by step. That helps a lot. Take a deep breath. That helps a lot.
Yep.
It's a lot of fun for us to really explore. I think we're at the early stage, but large language model is definitely fascinating, and I can't wait for the next iteration of whatever the next model might be.
Right. No, I think we're all sort of. I mean, it's funny that we're all waiting for the next model. Sometimes I feel like we haven't really captured enough of the value from GPT-4 itself. But I guess with these things, it's sort of like a consumer product. Like, what's going to be the next one? Um, I think I wanted to also ask you. There's a lot of students and young folks in engineering colleges that I sort of work with, and they're interested in knowing more about AI, language models, how to use it, how to make it part of their career. When they graduate, what are some pieces of advice for them? What would you ask them to sort of start off on? Because when I talk to them, there's a lot of history of language model development, right? It goes back to NLP, ML, and statistical pattern recognition, and being able to sort of come up to speed with all of that is challenging, right? But what is it that they can start, adopting now that could make them not just users, right, but also contributors to the AI ecosystem?
Well, to start with, use LionAGI. But
Oh,
the longer answer is, so I see how the current state is comparable to the first industrial revolution. In the first industrial revolution, it really brought the ability to choose for many people. But now the current wave, in my opinion, will empower people to know the how tos, the know-how of how things work, and this amount of agency it provided um, really empowers you to able to go get what you want. So I think a really important thing is to start wanting things. Like you have some idea and then you can just go ahead and do it. And I think that is probably the most important part right now. Have some idea, just go ahead and do it, and then apply whatever model you can find or package you can find. Just try things out. I don't think there's any better way than just actually experimenting yourself.
that's a very good point. I think I was having a recent conversation with an undergraduate student from a college, from my undergrad college, Ramaya, MSRIT in Bangalore. I'm also a visiting faculty there, joined recently, and this student, wants to fine tune a large language model, right? And they were sort of intrigued by the current competition by Ludwig guys, Predibase, right? They're running a competition to fine tune large language models, and a lot of the folks in the student body were not sure about what to fine tune on. And this person actually came up to me and said, you know what, I want to fine tune on identifying the right chess moves or opening moves for winning games, so that if given after fine tuning, you could prompt the model to say, hey, these were the opening moves, what's the likelihood of winning the game, I would get some sort of score. And I was actually intrigued by that question because it was something so atypical of what I've seen in terms of fine tuning use cases. And so you make a very good point that they need to have something they want to solve, and maybe they just go and solve it with AI, with LLMs, or with any other technology. But that's, I think, the initial requirement, right? Uh,
Yes.
that's
We're
it. That's
definitely not at a stage that you can just you can simply accumulate technical expertise and expect to make it. I think that perspective will definitely shift quite a lot. Like I actually do see entrepreneurship as a way of living is becoming more and more real.
Got it. Is that really because of the shift that AI has brought in place?
I was like a lot of people have ideas, they want to do things, but they don't have the technical expertise over the business world, finance, tax, coding, marketing, or whatever. With a lot of agents, like because you're then as like the CEO, you make decisions. Agents do things to you, get back to you, and all you need to do are decisions. And a lot of things will be automated for you to do. That is kind of how human organization perform anyway. You have the leadership making decisions, and you have the workers actually the job.
Hello. Yeah, I think there's some sort of network issue, I guess. Can you hear me? I'm not able to hear you.
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Sorry, there was a bit of a disturbance in the middle. No, I think you have a very good, I think, metaphor there, right? The analogy of an organization with a leader and workers and employees and so on, and it's sort of similar to people who are entrepreneurs today, where if they don't have a skill or want a task done, they can go to a Fiverr or an Upwork or a TopTal and hire individuals who could solve that, or agencies who could solve those tasks for them, right? I don't think we're very far away from a future where you have an Upwork that is staffed by agents, right? And you can just sort of go and look at, you could search for an agent that can write Python or web develop or design, for the web, or create a Figma or what have you, right? The entire sort of broad spectrum of tasks, and then you could choose based on the cost and the quality and so on and so forth, right? Do you think that that's a reality that we'll be living in soon?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love that too, right? I think I've used Upwork so much that I feel an AI driven Upwork where there are agents would be a great thing, more accessible, especially, and maybe a lot more people could imagine being entrepreneurs.
Actually, like this is already going with OpenAI's developer announcement in November that they pushed out GPT. We are already seeing this trend. So
Right.
I would say you might have some kind of app store in future, and then people push out their own agents as tools to help you figure out. So you will have your main orchestration system, and then some people will just start providing tools, and then you use those tools to automate your own life's daily workflow. So I do see that as a pretty legit business model, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the marketplace was due soon, but next year is going to be an even more interesting year. And with that, I'd love to continue the conversation in the next year. But for today, this has been great, Haiyang. Really appreciate your time. Conversation was amazing. I learned a lot, and hopefully, my audience will reach out and use LionAGI. I'm going to absolutely try it out myself. And thanks again.
Well, thank you so much, Harsh, for inviting me. It was absolutely a pleasure talking with you today.
Take care, Haiyang. Bye bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.